Welcome to Your Life Simplified. My name is Brian Leitner, and I'll be the host of this podcast. Today's show is about cybersecurity. The reality is we are all impacted by cybersecurity. So the question becomes, what can we do to educate ourselves to make sure that we are taking the best steps to protect ourselves, to protect our own devices, as well as just security transactions? This topic is obviously critical for many of us because cybersecurity and cybercrime, in one way or another, impacts all of us. There are billions of dollars that are spent by companies across the country. Many firms have to spend a great deal of money in order to protect your data. And if you just think about in most recent times, in 2017, you had the Equifax data breach, as well as Uber and many other companies. So it's a great conversation to have to be able to educate yourself and protect yourself. And today I've invited Chris Cook, who's the head of IT for Mariner Wealth Advisors, to help educate us and answer some of the questions that you likely have on your mind. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
So Chris, how do you define cybersecurity?
So I would probably define cybersecurity as a habit, tactic, or method you can use to maintain the security of your identity, mainly focusing on what we call your personally identifiable information. That consists of your full name, your home address, obviously your social security number, data points like that could, really relate your information to, yourself.
So Chris, thanks for being here. There's a lot of information that's out there. What we've done is we've asked our listeners as well as friends of the podcast if they had any questions that they would want some answers to as it relates to cybersecurity, whether it be in their professional life, their personal life, all in an effort to protect them. So we have sort of the top 10 questions that we wanted to ask you to make sure that, again, we're all being protected. So if you're ready for the top 10, I'm ready.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so one question that came in, and there's a question about password vaults. Can you explain password vaults, your thoughts on whether it's a good or bad idea to leverage these tools?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Historically, we've been kind of brainwashed that we have to use, strong passwords. And by strong passwords, it's a bunch of characters and digits that don't really matter anything. They don't make sense to you. And because of that,
like question marks and exclamation points.
And in doing something like that, it makes it very complicated for you to have to use more than one. And so what makes you the most secure is using a unique password for every site. And in doing so, if something gets compromised, you don't compromise everything else. And so where does this matter with password vaults is, it gives you one password to be able to unlock a vault that contains all of your other unique passwords. So you don't necessarily have to remember 150 of them, which is, I think, how many I maintain. But you can just remember your master password, which a good recommendation for a password of that is a long sentence, a movie quote, lyrics out of a song, things like that using full punctuation, spaces, make a very, very strong password. Data shows that the length of the password matters substantially more than the characters in it. So I would say 20 to 25 characters. If you use a master password like that, you can pretty much guarantee that everything inside that password safe is pretty secure.
So just to drill down that a little further, so if no one's ever used one of these password vaults, you log into the password vault, you put your long password in, maybe it's that phrase, maybe it's that your favorite song or something of that nature. Once you get in there, is it sort of an Excel spreadsheet that has all of your passwords?
Yeah, you could relate it to that for sure. There's usually a bunch of pictures of the icons of each company that you're logging into. And then from there, it allows you to just click on, say, your bank or, your favorite streaming service or something like that. If you just click on the icon, it launches you into the site and then auto-fills the username and password for you.
That's excellent.
It works through, a desktop computer on the web. It also works on a mobile app on your phone. So they're very convenient to use, and they're getting easier to use every day.
Yeah, we've leveraged that here at Mariner, so thanks for installing that for everybody.
Absolutely.
So next question, phishing. What is that? So again, it's phishing with a capital P. What is that, and how does that work?
So phishing is, it comes in usually the form of an email. It can also be a phone call, but typically email, and it's pretending it tries to get your attention of being something important, something impactful to your life. Something happened with the security of your bank account. You're getting, there's an issue with a payment somewhere. They want you to claim a shipment of something that you won. It's usually something to entice you to click on a link in an email that is trying to either harvest your credentials or compromise the computer you're on. They come in many shapes or forms, and it's no matter how secure or how much email you go through, some of them seem to get through. So I would recommend reading, the from address, hovering over the links to see exactly which website that they're trying to take you to before you really click anything in email these days.
So some of the typical ones that you might get is a name of a company that you've seen the logo before, you're very familiar with it, but there's something just not right about it. If you take the time to actually look at every piece of that logo or what's in that email. So for example, like, would Amazon be a good example when instead of spelling it Z-O-N towards the end, it's Z-I-N or something like that? Is that a typical example?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen many, shipping companies, retail companies, where they're actually taking the order confirmation page that looks exactly like what you would get if you were to buy something, send that to you, maliciously with links that then lead you to log into a site that looks like an Amazon. To where you put in your username and password, and they're just then saving it and then logging into the real Amazon with it.
And they're having a whole shopping experience.
Exactly, yeah.
I know that within our organization, and something that you guys do is that you run these phishing tests across the organization and see, who you could actually trick into clicking on a link and just making sure that we're all on top of things and making sure that we're not getting phished ourselves. I mean, based on some of that preliminary data that you guys do, how many people are falling for some of the stuff you put out there?
Oh man, when we started, I would say 18, 24 months ago, it was very common for someone to click on it. I mean, I would say we made like our best one that we sent out, we maybe got 100 people to click on it. Not necessarily to fill in all their information, but through training and through multiple simulations, we're all getting better at this. And, understanding what the risks are, understanding that kind of ties to, everybody being vigilant in reading their email and reading what they're clicking on. That now, I mean, we're within like just a few percent every time we send one, even get opened and maybe just a couple clicks. And so then, when that kind of thing happens, we do targeted training, we reach out to them, we really educate them at the time that it happens. Which is, very, very powerful.
Yeah, I got to imagine, look, all of us, whether it's this organization or anybody listening to the show, gets a ton of email. It's easy to just scroll through, click through without paying attention. This looks about right. So it's a great tip. Thank you very much. So number 3, do I need to pay for antivirus malware or anti-spyware software? What do I really need these things on my computer?
You definitely need them on your computer. Antivirus, to kind of clarify what the differences are. Virus is something that's typically trying to do damage to your computer. Ransomware is something that you hear a lot of. It's a pretty common virus. And that just tries to destroy data on your computer so that then they can hold you ransom. You pay X amount of dollars. They, free up your data so that it's not destroyed anymore. And what that antivirus does is basically protect against those things in real time. What spyware does is it infects your computer by living next to all of your good data, and then watching what things you're clicking on. It could be logging the keys that you're typing in, so that if it detects you go to your bank website, it's copying down exactly what you type in as your username, type in as your password. Ultimately just trying to get enough credentials harvested that it can then reuse them against you. And so they're two different things depending on, which product you download. They usually have kind of an overlap of both of them now. But in this day and age, it's such a problem that all of these are, just what we call freeware. And so most of the good ones that are out there right now offer a free variant for home. And so most of the paid services are all the legacy, type antiviruses that are still around. But there's a ton of free options that are really, really good, that, don't require you to have to remember to renew them or all of that kind of stuff.
So no excuse. A lot of good free options out there. Get the protection.
Definitely.
Okay, terrific. So number 4, someone told me that using a separate computer just for your financial accounts might be a great way to protect yourself, your financial identity, just in case something does get infected. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the hassle is well worth it. And just for all the reasons that I just mentioned, from antivirus and cybersecurity and spyware, it's mainly surrounding getting all of that information and taking all of the information from applications that are, installed on your computer you don't know. So the viruses, the spyware that's installed that's trying to steal your credentials. If you only access financial websites on a separate computer and you're still running antivirus and spyware on that one, but you're not going to you're not doing Google searches, you're not looking at photos, you're not doing any of that kind of stuff on that computer, it really lowers your, like what we call the attack surface, because there's not a lot of ways, for them to infect you. So like I said, email and phishing is a big way to infect a computer. If you're not checking your email on that computer, you're removing that, that attack vector.
Sure. So it sounds like it's a decent amount of legwork to only check your financial accounts on that one computer. But at the same time, should your data be compromised, you'll be glad you did if you decide to go that route.
Yeah, and there's an additional spend, obviously, but I wouldn't necessarily say that you have. This is, don't imagine this as like another desktop computer sitting on a desk. Like this can be a separate tablet, like an iPad or something like that you only use for financial accounts. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a traditional type desktop computer.
Thank you. Okay, so question number 5 is as it relates to two-factor authentication. So what is it and who uses it?
So two-factor authentication is used in a lot of different websites that are really trying to understand that you, the person, are on the other side of the computer that's trying to connect to them. And so what happens in two-factor authentication is, you type in your username, your password typically, and then it prompts you for, another number. That number comes to you via text message, sometimes email, sometimes phone call, however you want to do it. But what it's trying to do is say that right now in this captive moment, the person that typed in the username and password is also the one that is able to receive and then type in the passcode. Sure. Very common in financial accounts, very common in the banking industry. I would recommend setting it up for email, things like that. Here at Mariner, we use what we call multi-factor authentication. And so we have, up to 10 different methods to validate an identity. Wow. From a push button application on a phone, from text message, from phone call, through email, many, many different ways to attempt to maintain that identity.
That's great. Thank you. I think I get that every time I log into my brokerage account or my bank account. It's terrific. Makes me feel good. I know it's an extra step, but it's pretty neat.
It's well worth
it. That protection. Yep. Sure.
Hey, just a quick note to our listeners. If you have a topic that you want to hear on this podcast, or you have a question about your own personal financial situation, please don't hesitate. Go ahead and send us an email at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com, and we'll have an advisor reach out to you directly. And now back to the episode.
Number 6, how do I protect my mobile applications? I mean, so many of us, I think today, spend more time on mobile than we do our traditional desktops, right? So how do we protect ourselves from our iPhones and our Androids and everything else that's out there?
We definitely do. Even at Mariner, we're pushing to become more and more mobile, just because it allows us to be anywhere at any time, access to anything. It's very convenient and really frees up a lot of time that we traditionally have to be here in the office. But how do you go about keeping that safe? There's a few different things that you need to think about. One of them is which apps are you installing? If you're like most people, you click on an app, it launches something, you click, either get or install. It gives you, there's a whole page of information that we typically don't read. We click allow, we click through, we accept, it installs. We really don't know what information it's taking from you, and you don't know where it's sharing it. And I think that's probably the biggest, the biggest risk to installing, mobile apps. What's different than computer apps is there are two, entities, the Apple and the Googles that are looking through these stores that are diligently looking through the applications and certifying them before they publish them to make sure, there's no malicious things happening.
It's good to know.
But from a non-malicious standpoint, it's a pretty not well-known thing that your data is sold everywhere for everything, to market to you, to understand demographics, to make products and services better. And really understanding that when you log into a mobile app or you sign up for a new service and you use, say, your Google account, anything that's stored in your Google account typically gets shared with that other app. So it could be as much as your name, Could be as much as your date of birth. It could be, all of the demographics around you, your interests, all of those kind of things. Well, a common one, Facebook does it all the time. Like a bunch of apps, you can log in with your Facebook. It shares your basic profile information, maybe, where you live, things like that. And so if you think that you're just putting that information into one application, you're then, by using what they have made very easy to use your login for another site, you're passing that information around to multiple companies.
Sure. So I continue to get targeted from banner ads to other types of marketing material that fill up my screen or my inbox. And
exactly.
All that stuff,
it's a huge business, and they typically make the path of least resistance, the one that is the one that transfers your information from company to company.
Okay, so bottom line, anytime you're going to download anything on your mobile device, make sure that you're reading exactly what you're accepting. I know many of us don't, but it's critical if you want to protect your data security.
Yep.
Sounds good. So number 7, Chris, this actually, this came from a client of ours at Mariner. We leverage part of our platform called Mariner GPS, and it's where folks can store all of their digital documents, track their expenses, and just see their living balance sheet. And the question becomes, ultimately, is that safe? Is that a safe application?
I would say as safe as it can be. It's tough for me to say that anything's 100% safe that's connected to the internet.
Sure.
But at the same time, in situations where we choose where any of our client information and, honestly, where our information is going to be stored, we do a very, very long diligence process. We sit down with our engineers, we understand where they're storing the data, how they're storing the data, what encryption they're using, not only where the data is stored, but then how it's transferred back and forth between, say the website and the client, the website and us, things like that. And so we worked with them a long time on Mariner GPS. It was a couple month process to really understand and to get us comfortable with how everything was being stored. But we do that for almost every application, let alone if it's storing client data or not. Just
Sure.
as good practice to understand what our attack surface would be, where someone would potentially try to look into that. So I would say it's definitely as safe as it can be.
All right, so I feel better about having my tax returns, my estate planning documents, and all my pictures on my GPS today. Thank you.
And like you said, it does have a 2-factor authentication capability built into it, so that you can have username or log in with a PIN, which then takes away the ability for them to know your user, like a common password.
Sure.
And so for those of you that have used Mariner GPS to where it says you can just put in a PIN code. Don't make that 4 digits, make that 6 or 8 digits,
right?
Something like that. That is unique to you, but that definitely just enhances the safety.
So, Chris, number 8, I think a lot of us have experienced this. We got hacked in some fashion, whether it's a Facebook account, an email account. Your suggestions on what's the first thing you should really do once you figure that out?
So the first thing that always comes to my mind is, where else did I use this username and password? And for me personally, that is nowhere because I use unique ones using the password safe, like we mentioned. But realistically, I know that it's very common to reuse usernames and passwords. Like, we see it every day. And the first thing you need to understand is, where else can this information be used? Beyond that, reaching out to the vendor to let them know if they haven't shut off your account already to freeze your access. But it's understanding if you've used that username and password is the same one, like you mentioned, Amazon, or it's the same thing you log into your bank with. The first thing I would do is notify those companies as well. Mainly because if they've taken that password, they can really log into anything as you. And we see it happen very, very quickly where they don't necessarily know your Amazon login, but they'll know like your email address, username and password. So they'll go to Amazon.com, they'll type in the email that they hit reset password, it sends an email to their email address, they log in, they set a new password, and now they have access to your Amazon account. So all of that happens very, very, very quickly. And so knowing where you've reused passwords or potentially what could be used against you is very powerful.
So appreciate that, Chris. As much and as often as everyone knows that they should change up their passwords on a regular basis, not use the same one for every site, people get lazy about it because there's so many logins that we have. I mean,
yep.
we're an internet-based society at this point. So to your point, leveraging the password vault just makes all the sense in the world. And there's a good handful out there to choose from. So,
and it's also worth mentioning, I would start in the order of what could be damaging to you the most.
Great point.
So starting at your bank, starting at your financial accounts, your brokerage accounts, things like that have a lot of impact to be transferred away from you with no ability to reverse is really where I would start contacting all of those, freezing cards, all of that stuff. And the next thing I would say is your primary email address that you use as your username at every other website. Mainly because, like I mentioned, it can be used against you very, very quickly to reset all of the passwords to everything else that you've been trying to keep secure. So even if they're unique, and you've done all of that, if you have a really weak primary email password, which is one that we tend to type in a lot, the same kind of situation happens.
So question 9, we've had this question come up just multiple times. It continues to come up, and we have a lot of folks here that travel. And when they travel, they need to get onto the Wi-Fi of the hotel they're on. And then, I think you've come out before in trainings and lectures and letting people know that, that hotel Wi-Fi may not be secure, and generally it's not. So then the question becomes, how do you protect yourself logging on the internet while you're on the road?
Good question. We get this one a lot still, mainly because people don't really understand the risks of it. I would say hotels, along with any restaurant you're at, Starbucks is a big one that we see that offers free Wi-Fi as convenience. People spend a lot of time there working. The main reason you wouldn't want to use one of those services, to check your finances or do anything like that, is because it's not making you an anonymous person on that network. And so it's not necessarily that it's not secure and that you're not going to be able to access it. It's that there's a whole bunch of other people sitting there next to you that can, see who you are from a network perspective in the open. And so they're able to see that you're running a Windows computer, and they can see, that it's vulnerable to these things. And then if it's vulnerable to those, then they can inject themselves, and potentially compromise your computer sitting right there.
So you're asking for trouble.
Exactly. It can happen in seconds. And, there's another big thing I won't get in too far down into, but it's called a replay attack. And what they'll do is once they compromise your computer, they will take information. Everybody's heard of cookies in a web browser that conveniently logs you back in as you visit. So when you're all there sitting on the same Wi-Fi, you're all using the same IP address to the business you're connecting to. And so let's use, Facebook again for just a common name. They'll take your login cookie from Facebook, put it on their computer, open Facebook, and now they're logged in as you.
Wow.
With, no username, no password, all because of that anonymity.
And to your point, they can do it on Facebook, they can do it on your bank accounts, they can do it on anything.
Yep, which is where, two-factor comes in. So, because that second factor is always going to be asked to you.
So you've talked to me in the past about, using your phone as a hotspot in order to protect yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, to your point, that's something that isolates you to your own specific network is using your, personal hotspot. If it's not using your phone, which is a pretty common capability on everybody's plan now, now we have iPads that you can have, your own cellular data connection.
Sure.
So you don't need a Wi-Fi anywhere. We also have that we leverage quite a bit is what we call like a MiFi, and it's a little device, kind of like a cell phone, that is made to be a hotspot for you, for your whole family, something like that. You can, they tend to be like fairly inexpensive. You get them from your wireless carriers, and then you can like have it in your car on vacation, so that the kids can watch videos in the back seat,
sure.
Things like that at the same time. But you're also keeping that network very, very small to the people that are connecting to it.
It's great. I appreciate it. To your point, the Starbucks, the McDonald's, the hotels, it makes it real convenient to log on. But at the same time, I don't know that everyone truly understands that they're putting themselves at risk on a regular basis. So appreciate that. And so question number 10. We've made it to number 10. And the question is, so how secure are online storage services like Google Docs, Box, Dropbox, etc.? I know they're real convenient, but are they secure?
I would say that you could make a case that all of them are secure. I think a lot of the security of each one of these comes to how you leverage it and the practice and the process you put in place around it. From a security diligence practice, like I mentioned, that we did with Mariner GPS, we've also done with a lot of cloud storage vendors, and so we're aware of which ones have better capabilities than others. And so it really does matter which one you choose. And so understanding who, has the more, certifications and, how they position your data, where they're storing it. Is it staying in the United States? Is it being shipped all over the place? Things like that you really want to understand. But, like I said, strong passwords, two-factor authentication, the data you're putting up there is kind of, the most important part. It's the same reason you have like a fire safe at home. Some of your most important documentation you store somewhere very, very secure. Maybe that's a post office box or something. But, what I'm getting at is if you just sign up for a free account at X storage service, I wouldn't feel free to store all of your tax returns, the social security numbers and all of that stuff on freely, mainly because when you're not paying for the service, you can't be 100% sure that you really own that data.
Right.
And so you don't know where that data is being copied to. You don't know if it's being destroyed after you don't use the account anymore, all of those kind of things.
Sure. No, I think that makes sense. I know a lot of people talk about, is the cloud safe and all that good stuff. And the reality is they have a ton of information on their desktop and on their hard drive. And we all know that that's not safe.
Yeah. I mean, it being local it's not safe for many reasons, from a compromise perspective, but also from a house fire perspective. Sure. Losing photos, losing, personal information.
Just dropping the computer, right?
It's irreversible.
So Chris, thanks for coming in. Thanks for answering the top 10 questions. I really appreciate it. I just got one more question for you.
Okay.
That question is the same question we ask all of our guests. What is the worst financial decision you've ever made?
Oh man, I have a couple of these I can pick from, but the one that sticks out to me the most is being a computer guy. I wanted, the newest and greatest laptop, and they were hard to come by because they only released a few of them. And, I was, I think 14, 15 years old. You couldn't just go to somewhere and pay cash for this laptop. So I had to go buy it online. And so I think I used eBay or something like that to find this laptop. It looked exactly like I wanted, had all the information that I needed, looked like it came from a reputable seller, all that kind of stuff. I spent the next week, talking my dad into like, hey, let me have your credit card so I can put it into this website to buy this laptop, to, ship it to me.
That just sounds like a great story right there.
Yeah, exactly. And it, he let me do it. He learned his lesson at the same time, I think. But, what ended up happening is they didn't just not take my money and leave. They actually, processed a shipment of something that weighed the same amount. It was a couple textbooks, weighed the same amount in a box. It had, shipped to me. It was like slow shipping back then. We didn't have any, kind of next day Amazon Prime type stuff. Right. It was like 7 to 10 days to get to me. Here I am, waiting, have so much excitement to open this thing. I open it up as a couple books. And then I have that fear of fear of falling. Yeah, exactly. And so I call my dad, and my dad calls the credit card company. We reach out to, I think it was eBay, and say, hey, this is all happening. Well, the guy had already, taken the money, closed the account,
Bye.
Exactly. And so we ended up getting the money back from the credit card.
Wow.
They gave it back to us because, them working with eBay, it was noticeable fraud of exactly what happened. I had to, take pictures, back then, take real pictures and
wasn't on your iPhone.
Exactly. And send them in an envelope to the credit card company. I mean, wow. it was 3-4 month long process to get the money back. So it very painful. Learn my lesson, be very, very, vigilant of everything that you're reading and everything you're putting in, to connect it to the internet.
It's a great lesson to learn for you and your dad, I guess.
Yep. Tough lesson.
So where are you buying your next computer?
Oh man, probably, I don't know. The internet's a lot safer place now than it used to be.
All right. So right back on the horse.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, there you have it. Your top 10 questions as it relates to cybersecurity. I hope after listening to this podcast, you'll be able to make decisions that will protect yourself from cybersecurity attacks so you don't become a victim of the cybercrime that's out there. As always, guys, if you have questions, email them at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. If you have feedback, if you have a topic that you'd like to hear about, please don't hesitate. Go ahead and email us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. Thanks for listening. And if you don't mind, leave a rating on the podcast wherever you listen to the podcast and share your feedback.
We know that your time is incredibly valuable, and we hope you find this podcast a worthwhile investment of your time.
Thank you for listening.
Mariner LLC, doing business as Mariner Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC registered investment advisor. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which a notice has been filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.